I have literally no idea if you can hear the birds outside, but they're going crazy and they've been going crazy all night. So I hope you enjoy the concert if you can hear them, and if not, just know that there are very happy birds outside. Hey everyone, my name is Envy and I'm a bit emotional today because I actually made it through university after my first attempt failed horribly because I ended up in a situation where my teachers ruined my mental health and kind of forced me to drop out. So I had to take a gap year and then I tried again and went for my BA in English Language and Culture, and all my grades are finally in. I can say it, I hold a BA in English Language and Culture. So to celebrate the fact that I have finally reached one of my main goals in life, I thought I'd make a video with my top 5 favorite books that I've had to read for university. I have read a lot of books, not as many as I could have. I'll explain why in a second. But there were some books in there that really changed my life and I want to share them with you today. Before I start with my top 5, I have to explain, I guess, what I did, because otherwise it seems like a random bunch of books. So I went to university, like I said, for a BA in English Language and Culture, which at my university meant that you take 50% literature courses and 50% linguistics in your first year, and at the end of your first year you choose if you want to do linguistics or literature. And if you've seen any of my videos, you can probably guess that I went with linguistics. So after my first year I didn't have to read as many books, but then in my third year I did a minor in post-colonial studies and the books were back on the menu. So that is where all these books are coming from. So without further ado, let's get into my list of favorite university reads. Number 5 is The Way to a Rainy Mountain by N. Scott Momaday. I had to read this book for a course called Civil War to Civil Rights. It covered literature from the US, starting from about, well, the 1860s to about the 1960s, 1970s. And it was a survey course, so we had about a week for each topic, and this one was required reading. That's a difficult word. Required reading for the week about Native American literature. The author is a member of the Kiowa tribe, and his father actually did the illustrations for this book. So this book is equal parts personal history of the author, the history of his tribe, and then their mythology and their beliefs. And you can see that in the book because each chapter has like 3 segments. So one for each storyline, let's put it that way. And the closer you get towards the end, the more intertwined and entangled those 3 storylines become until they are one and the same. And I love that structure-wise, it's very unique. And like I said, it also has these images that are made by the author's father. I don't think I should show that one because that one has skulls. But stuff like this, it's just beautiful and made by people from this tribe. This book is definitely one of my favorites, and I'd highly recommend it to people who actually have an interest in Native American tribes, because this is such an easy read to ease into things. It's not the be-all and end-all, but a very good starting point. Number 4 is Haroun and the Sea of Stories by Salman Rushdie, and I had to read this one for a course called, let me check. It was called Traditions and Modernities, South Asian Literature and Culture Since the Early 20th Century. I usually just called it South Asian Literature because that's what it was, and that was much easier. It was probably my favorite literature course of all of them because South Asia was more or less my focus region throughout all my courses and all my studies. So this book, which has a very weird print on the front, which makes it sort of trippy to look at for way too long. Anyway, this book was the first thing I ever read by the author, but it got me so interested in his work because of the way he plays with language. I should just tell you what the book is about before I start ranting about this, because this actually laid the groundwork for my thesis. But anyway, this is like an amalgamation of fairy tales. So Rushdie draws upon Western tradition, but also Middle Eastern and South Asian storytelling traditions, and he brings them all together to make this modern fairy tale. And this fairy tale is about Haroun, whose father is a storyteller, but one day he can't tell stories anymore because the sea of stories is getting polluted, and Haroun is going to solve this whole problem. He goes on epic adventure, you know, fairy tale style, to make everything okay and make sure that Sea of Stories is safe again. I absolutely love this because of the way Rushdie plays with the language. It's very clearly rooted in South Asia. You can tell by the way the characters speak, the sounds of it. Like, I've never been there, but I know from friends who are from the region how they sound, and it's like the sound of the subcontinent is captured in this book. The way he plays with the language is really fascinating, so that laid the groundwork for my eventual thesis. What else can I say about it? There's so much I want to say about this. What I enjoyed most was the fact that if you know a little bit of Hindi or Urdu, the names in this book get like a whole different type of meaning. There's also a glossary in the back. If you don't speak those languages, you can still pick up on like the little jokes that are hidden in the names, but it's so much fun to like discover that by yourself if you're learning the languages. So this one was my number 4, and it even got my dad interested in South Asian literature, which is a small miracle. Number 3 is The Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh, and I do not have a physical copy of that one because those weren't available when I had to buy one and read it, so I read an ebook on my phone, which was not a success. But lucky for me, the story was great. This was also for my South Asian literature and culture class, and I enjoyed this one a lot because it had river dolphins. Like, my friends just wanted me to shut up about the dolphins because every time I read something interesting about river dolphins, I'd be texting them like, yo, I'm reading the book about the dolphins and now I've learned that the dolphins yada yada yada. I had a great time. Anyway, I should probably tell you what the book is about. It's about Pia, who is a member of the South Asian diaspora. Her parents moved to the United States and she became a marine biologist, so she has now returned to India. She's close to the border with Bangladesh because she is doing this study on river dolphins. And as she's there, she learns a lot about the river dolphins, as did I, but she also learns a lot about local history and the way the people there live in the river delta, which, as someone who grew up in a river delta herself, I found very interesting and also very relatable. It's a book about people and their history, but also the way they try to survive in an environment that's not always friendly. It's a bit difficult to explain why I enjoyed this one more than the other two, because it was mainly because of the dolphins, and I like learning facts about random animals I've never thought about a day in my life before I found out that they are awesome. But I also appreciated the way it dealt with local history, and that it did not just give us this way of thinking like we have to look at it from this point of view. No, we got both local and the outsider perspective on floodings, on living with animals, animal protection. I think those are going to be very important themes throughout the upcoming years, with climate change forcing animals into, well, our habitat and us going into theirs, and there's just going to be this increased conflict between animals and humans, and resources are getting scarce. So in that regard, I think this is a great book to get you thinking about what we're doing and if our way of living with nature and protecting nature is actually the right way to go about it. In second place is Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I read this one for my post-colonial theory class, which was coincidentally also taught by the same teacher as South Asian literature. So I should probably reach out to her and ask for some recommendations, because this is the third book she made me read that I put on this list. So she is doing something right when it comes to recommending me books. Apologies in advance for me not being able to pronounce Nigerian names. This is about high school sweethearts. Obinze and Ifemelu is how we pronounced it in class. And after graduation, they go their separate ways. Ifemelu goes to the US and Obinze goes to the UK as an illegal immigrant. And years later, they reconnect in Nigeria. Now, why I appreciated this book so much is that Ifemelu in the US writes this blog about race and the way she experiences race in the US as an African immigrant as opposed to African Americans. And that part of the book answered so many questions I've had for so long about these two groups of Black people and how they interact with each other, if their experiences are different. And of course I could have guessed that their experiences are different, but I did not know how to read more about this or how I could get into touch with like that aspect of American life. And then there was also one part in this book that made me cry because I experienced that firsthand, and I think most white people with curly hair, much curlier than mine or even a little less, have been in this position where they've been told that their hair is not pretty and they should straighten it because they look so much better if their hair is straight. And it feels like there's a hierarchy when it comes to hair types. This book explained it in a scene in which Ifemelu has to use all these terrible chemicals on her head to straighten her hair so she can look presentable for a job interview. And I want to read what she has to say about her hair and curly hair in general, because reading that was for me a moment of recognition, of knowing, hey, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. People really are shitty when it comes to hair that's not entirely straight. My full and cool hair would work if I were interviewing to be a backup singer in a jazz band, but I need to look professional for this interview, and professional means straight is best, but if it's going to be curly, then it has to be the white kind of curly. Loose curls or, at worst, spiral curls, but never kinky. I'm on the safe end of the spectrum that Ifemelu describes here, and still it has been painful enough before people telling me that the main reason I'm ugly is my hair. So this passage made me feel seen in a way that I haven't felt seen before. I was not expecting that from this book, and that just added to its value to me as a person, and it added to me accepting that curly hair, whatever it might look like, even if it's just mine and wavy, that is fine and that is beautiful, and I refuse to straighten my hair from now on. Now, before we move on to my all-time favorite university read, I want to spend some time on honorable mentions. The first of which is James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, which I've already talked about in a different video. I love this book because it taught me a lot about the civil rights movement and Nation of Islam that I had no idea about, because Dutch high schools don't really care much about the civil rights movement in the US, and this is essential reading if you're European and you want to know what's going on with institutionalized racism in the US and the civil rights movement. In similar vein, I want to mention what is the full title, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. We just refer to it by saying Frederick Douglass, which is a story written by a former enslaved man himself. His life story is just so impactful and so difficult to imagine from my point of view that this really happened, but this really added to my understanding again of racism in the US. And after reading this, Frederick Douglass suddenly was everywhere in other books I was reading, in the news, on murals, and suddenly it felt like my eyes had been opened to a part of world history that I previously just was completely ignorant about. My number one read, I don't think anyone will see this coming, is a Terry Pratchett book. This is Nation, and this was the most unexpected book I've ever seen pop up on my required reading lists, because it's basically just a fantasy book. I read Nation for a class called Language and Identity, which is very obviously about language and identity and how we use language to express our identity, which seems super obvious, but that's also about the accents we use and how we change our language when we're around different people. It was an amazing class. We related all the theory to this book, and this class was also a sort of drama class. We were actually taught in a theater, and we'd sit like on stage and have little book clubs every week with this book, and then we'd read this super serious academic paper about language and identity and then try to connect it to the book. So that added to why I love this so much, because it seemed like it had nothing to do with what we were gonna learn, and then we were sort of challenged to find connections in there, which was awesome, also because this is a very enjoyable book. Also, I hear another airplane coming. What is up today? Where's everyone going? We're still in a bit of a situation here with a virus. What is this book about, you might ask? Well, it is set in the Pacific in, I think, the late 1800s, in a sort of alternate universe that is very much like ours. So there is, for example, British colonization going on. Yay, always fun, but there are also significant differences between our world and theirs. But on this one island in the Pacific, this guy, Mao, lives, and he's about to become a man. And to become a man, he has to go to this smaller island, perform a ritual, and he'll return a man. But while he's out there on his boat, on his way to the island, a tsunami swoops in and basically wipes out everything on his home island. Everything, everyone, of course. So he returns to find nothing. There is one thing added to the island though, and that's this girl, that's Daphne. She is British. Yay! Colonizer! No, it's not that bad. They meet and they actually become friends, and then this story is mostly about what it means to be like a nation. What does it mean to belong to a certain group or to a certain island? It's about tradition, it's about religion, it's about communication. And what I really liked is that Daphne actually learns Mao's language instead of forcing him to learn English. So there is a lot going on in this book, a lot about colonization that's made accessible. So this book is just funny, it is a great read. I was stranded one day on a train station and I read like 200 pages before the rescue bus came to bring me home. Also, the puking bird is like this running gag throughout all of it. It was the most unexpected university read ever, and I think that that contributed in large part to it being my all-time favorite university read. So those are my 5 favorite books that I had to read for university classes, and a few honorable mentions, which I also highly recommend. I recommend all of the books I mentioned here, but of course that were not all the books I had to read, not by a long stretch. So I made a Goodreads shelf. If you're nosy, go check that one out. It's linked down below, and you can see which books and also which plays and poems I had to read for my BA in English Language and Culture. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm now going to go elsewhere and be super happy that I made it after all this time. If you enjoyed the video, you know what you're gonna do. I'm gonna head out and just be happy for a long time.